Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and here's another Forbidden Music, and we're back to the Beatles' Rubber Soul. So the reason this is interesting to me, I had a little riff going on when I was posting K-Rockstar about how this is an example of the record company hosing the Beatles, even though they were the biggest band in the world. Some things never change. It is a album where they yanked a bunch of the songs off of the British release to put out on the compilation Yesterday and Today. They were making compilations by stealing songs off of the Beatles albums for the American release in order to put them out as another record to force people to buy it separately. And the Beatles were doing their level best to make albums that were cohesive statements, but the record company did not care about this. So they just stole songs off of the records and put them out anyhow. Here's one of the examples. They even did this on Revolver. They pulled, I believe, Dr. Robert off of Revolver. And Sgt. Pepper was the first time that they didn't let the record company steal tracks off of their albums to put on like cheap. This is also why there was that Butcher cover. If you remember the stories of Yesterday and Today, Yesterday and Today was the American album where they were putting out things like Dr. Robert, things like Drive My Car, which I believe was on this one. I'm not entirely sure. And as such, it's a pretty hot album. It's got a bunch of good songs on it. Unfortunately, they were meant to be on the songs. They were meant to be on this album or on Revolver and so on and so forth. So the Beatles were asked to pose for the cover of the album with the stuff that had been stolen off of their other albums. They did not like this. They were not exactly happy about this. It's like expecting people to be happy about AI stealing all your work. And so they dressed up in butcher's aprons, these white aprons with like meat and blood and baby heads and things like that. And they posed for that so that they could have that album get the cover they thought it deserved. And that didn't last very long, but that's why they did it. It's not just because they were trying to be edgy. It was because they were lashing back against being exploited. And yeah, some things never change. But one thing that's interesting about this album, and I'm going to draw your attention to it, seeing as we don't get to listen to it properly. And we didn't even, when I recorded this and used ContentID to show glimpses of the sound, but without getting content struck for playing the actual song, because I don't get to play the actual song. I didn't actually hear the primary hook at any point during the track, but you still get to pick up on some of the tonal balance coming off of the record. And one of the things that's real striking is how like bright and upper MIDI and high frequency like it is. Another album that I've been doing as far as recording stuff off of vinyl and then editing them down to individual songs and running them through Meter, because I'm doing that a lot at the moment. I had the good fortune of being able to do one of the records that the Beatles envied at the time that they were doing this. They were doing albums like Help and Rubber Soul and so on, and they were extremely frustrated by the way that American labels like Stax were able to put out punch and bass and intensity and loudness that they felt completely unable to produce. So they did their level best to try. And this is some of that. Like this song, It's Only Love, has a full band on it. It's got bass and so on. And singing. You'll hear very clearly how the voices have enormous presence and character, but part of that is because everything is just kind of bright. It's sort of bright and high MIDI, and the low frequencies don't necessarily get through as well as you'd think, partly because this is a fully tube console and running on high voltage, and all kinds of things run through either transformers or through coupling capacitors. Coupling capacitors are high-pass filters. I was telling somebody on Reddit about this not so long ago. So when you have a full system that, unlike the TG12345 that is Abbey Road and also Dark Side of the Moon, etc., these older, the Reds that they built, they figured they were making them able to handle bass, but they didn't really want to put subsonic bass onto records anyhow because they didn't think that the styluses could track it. And so they designed the consoles around just reasonable bass, and then all those coupling capacitors would also take away the extreme low bass. And what ends up happening is you just get kind of a hint of it in there. And then they would lean on the EQs to try to make it so that it still sounded like the Stax records that the Beatles were hearing and being like, get me this. Why can't you get me this? My bass doesn't sound like this bass. There's a record from Booker T and the MGs that I've recorded some tracks off of. And that's really cool. First of all, it's amazing music. But the lathes in use for Stax records and the Booker T and the MGs were a little better than EMI had at the time. And a lot of people were building their own consoles and mixing systems at the time. That's in Memphis. Mind you, in California, there was a whole LA sound happening, which is where the Quad 8 console came from. But back in merry old England, where the Beatles were doing these albums, they were desperately trying to get a fuller sound, more like what they were hearing off of these Stax records and so on, and failing. But they were failing in an interesting way. And the intensity with which they were pushing for this sound that was a little bigger than their technology could handle gives rise to a really powerful, interesting sound, even if the lows don't really handle things the way that the Booker T and the MG's record handles things. So yeah, sadly you don't get to hear much of this because it is forbidden music. I don't get to put this out. Similarly to Prince and Eagles and so on, this is one of the canonical don't get to listen to this records. But you get to hear little snippets of it and listen to where the various things sit, because this is also my job for the rest of this year, is by Christmas I should be able to put together a console version that produces this sound off of just normally recorded things. And that's a limiting factor. Like, when you hear this, listen to how restricted the sound is. I can give this to you, but then it won't be able to do everything that people do with music these days. But I bet you I can give this. So on that note, here is It's Only Love by the Beatles, kind of, sort of, but you get to see what it does in Airwindows Meter.
I see you go, my oh my inside, butterfly, my soul shine, that is all the way I do. And that is all. Loving you, is it right? I should fight. Just nighttime bright. I have to make it's